Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way, where we talk about how writing works, how writers work, and why the best writers risk being strange. And speaking of strange, Stranger Fiction, the imprint publishing side of Stranger Fiction, is going to put out 2 books soon. They're available to order online now, but you can also go November 29th to McNally Robinson in Winnipeg, or join the stream if you're not in Winnipeg that night. November 29th is the release of Shared World, an anthology featuring myself, GMB Chomichuk, James Gillespie, and Chadwick Ginther. And also that day, the premiere release of Kyber, the new book from Chadwick Ginther, featuring some of the stories that you'll find in the Shared World and other stories set in the Shared World. Some, which you may never have read before. And we're going to talk a bit about the Shared World, which is not just a book, but a kind of project that we are doing, and which you, listening, are invited to join. So why don't we talk a bit about, first off, guys, what is the Shared World? What is it? Where did it come from?
Okay, so GMB Chomichuk here, letting you know that the Shared World is a place where we are setting a collection of sinister sword and sorcery stories. It's a great big map made up of place names and moments in our collective works, and that was a great day to put all those things down. But there is a whole lot of blank space on that map, which we hope others will come in and just join us in this genre and play around and have horrible things happen to their characters the way horrible things happen to ours in their stories.
Yeah, and let's also have Chadwick jump in and talk a bit about Kyber itself. So Kyber is its own book. It's set in the Shared World. It's kind of a Shared World book, but it also, is this kind of standalone collection of stories featuring stuff that isn't in the Shared World book.
I'll set you up, Chadwick. I'll wingman you. Chadwick is the best of us. He's graduated first to be the first person to have enough stories set in the world to be its own collection, which is also one of the features of the Shared World, that the authors therein can also have their own standalone titles if they've got enough words to fill it.
You too can be first if you're lazy enough.
Yes.
And so some of that was that I've already done some world building for Kyber, for the city of Kyber, so I'm going to keep writing there because I don't feel like I'm done yet. That's kind of how I got to be in this position. Kyber kind of came out of my love of the Lankmar stories, and I liked that city of ne'er-do-wells, and that's kind of my favorite aspect of the sword and sorcery. I don't think a lot of us think of Conan as a thief, but that's if you like a thief and a reaver. Those are some of the first descriptors that you get of Conan. I think, was it Tower of the Elephant? Was that the first story? I don't know if it was the first story published, but it's an early adventure of Conan. And
the first one that comes to mind is him free climbing that big rock edifice, and he's climbing up this mountainside with nothing, and all that's on his mind is the treasure that's on the other side of the wall. He's like, I'm going to steal that. I'm going to carry it back down the mountain myself. Right? He's not in it for glory. He just wants to pay for his bar tab.
Yeah. And so like that aspect of the thieves and the reavers stumbling onto things that they didn't really understand, I loved that. And so that was kind of that was the bones that Kyber grew out of.
And in some ways that connects really cleanly to what happens in Lovecraft, and so many of those stories. I mean, Conan stories explicitly had a crossover to Lovecraft. Some of the creatures from the mythos appear in Robert E. Howard's stories because he was friends with and close. What's the
correspondent? They were pen pals.
But that basic structure of you stumble across something and it's so much more than it seems.
Yeah, I remember the exact moment that Kyber was born. I was watching Cities of the Underworld. It was where I can't remember if it was a History Channel or Discovery Channel. I found it on, I think it was History Channel, and I found it on DVD at like a used DVD place. And I'm like, oh, that looks neat. I just put it on the background, and the host went into the Basilica Cistern under Istanbul. And I'm like, I got to write a story in there. And that was that became my story Red, which is in
I've
my
trod
collection,
those
Kyber.
very stones. I've been in that cistern.
And so that was my
Did
origin
they
story
Travel the
for it.
sewers of your dreams.
But listen, did they talk in that documentary about the sideways head?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Tell us about this sideways.
So in the cistern under Istanbul, and depending on who we were talking to, everyone had a different story as to why it was there. So I'd be curious to know what they said on your documentary. But the people who lived there were like, everyone tells a story, but no one actually knows. And you'd only be able to find these if the cistern was drained, number one, which these 1,000 years later, it is drained low enough that at the bottom of the base of this set of pillars that holds this enormous cavern up are all these heads of these different, they seem to be gods or edifices of some sort, are the base of the pillar, and one of them, and only one, is turned on its side. So it's sideways with the pillar coming like from its ear up. And it stands out so eerily because the water level when we were there was just at the point where only half the face was exposed, and its open mouth is calling to you, but so it's drowning and everyone else's face is above water, right? And it was just the eeriest, my first experience with architecture on that scale that was subterranean. So right there with you. That's amazing. Did we know this? Did we have this conversation before?
Maybe lost to the mists of time.
Oh my
but,
gosh!
Heard it here first.
that was the moment that Kyber was born, and I started writing Red, which was the first story I wrote in what would become part of the shared world. I believe it was only the third story I ever completed. As
I'm my mind is blown right now. Yeah, think of the number of events that had to occur for all of that to happen together.
Giving some context to shared world, though, so we've heard from Kyber, right? But you and I, we've both written a story in the shared world from the Once Lands, and how this all came together was that we had all submitted to an anthology.
That's right.
And that was Sword versus Cthulhu.
Yeah,
I believe so.
And we got rejected soundly. Well, not that soundly. We almost made the cut. Yeah.
And as a result of that, decided, to hell with this anyway. Let's put our stories together, share the world, so to speak, and put it out there to see what the response is.
I think that the title Shared World came from, we were on a tight deadline of having to figure out what to call the book.
Shared world we're doing. Everyone, this is called, and we were talking to Sylvia, right, who was doing our introduction. Sylvia Moreno Garcia was doing our introduction, and she was talking about how common this shared world thing is in pulp fantasy, and we're like, oh, what are we going to call our shared world story? Oh, I guess that's it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we were actually just talking about this, and it's an interesting question that I think we could answer right now. Is we were talking about what was the motivation to move away from the anthology and publish ourselves. Right?
No, Weep at Rejection? Why?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, so I don't know what everybody's relationship with rejection is, but mine has always been tempered by the fact that I met Stephen Erickson, the writer of the Mazatlan Books of the Fallen series, when I was an early writer. I was doing my first drafts of my first novels. We shared a coffee shop, and a mutual friend introduced us. And he reminded me that this concept that not all publishers talk. And just because one rejects a story doesn't mean that all would reject the story. And so your work as a writer is to gather rejections. Go get some rejections. And so it has never been to me like your story's no good, because just the act of creation is itself a success. Like if you've managed to make anything and like it, that you made it, that is enough. Publishing is the byproduct of writing. It's not the point of writing. And so make stuff, feel good about making stuff, share it if you can. So it's never frightened me to get rejected. If I get enough rejections of the same story and all the notes are the same, I know there's something fundamentally wrong with it. I don't necessarily know how to fix it, and I won't take their advice how to fix it necessarily, but I'll agree that it needs work. So that's my relationship with it.
I feel differently. Like for the Draxus stories that I've been writing for the Shared World, I've also I wrote them for Shared World. Then I started think I really like how these stories turned out. I'm going to start submitting them around. But of course they were been soundly rejected everywhere I sent them, and I know for a fact part of the reason is that Draxus is a cannibal. And it's sword and sorcery, but she's a cannibal, like a vicious, cannibalistic protagonist who's trying to wake up an eldritch god that may destroy the world.
So you think that
So
maybe people would have a hard time relating?
They're too Lovecraftian for sword and sorcery, for fantasy in some ways, and they're too fantasy for like Lovecraft horror in some ways.
That's what I like about them personally.
Well, that's what I like about the Shared World is like it's kind of this hybrid of these different things.
Was absolutely built on the bones of both those elements, because that was the inciting anthology that made us want to write those stories.
Yeah, what I liked about because I came to the Shared World late, where you guys had written your stories and I'd read them, and I got excited about the Shared World idea and like how can I horn my way into the Shared World. So part of it to me though, what was interesting about what you guys were doing was I hadn't really seen a lot of people balance those elements. Like I'd seen people combine them, and like I say, even Howard was doing it. But they would always really lean hard one way or lean hard the other way, Like I hadn't seen a lot of leaning on the Lovecraft cosmic horror side in Sword and Sorcery. Sword and Sorcery tends to not lean to cosmic horror and extremely. And cosmic horror tends to not be set in a fantasy scenario. So there's obviously exceptions, but I really liked how I felt, to me it felt like fresh. It felt like a fresh kind of balancing act that you guys were doing.
So is it fresh as it might seem?
Maybe it's not fresh, but to me it just seemed like the ratio is doing it.
My secret ingredient that is different from the Lovecraft Howard connection, so like the Cthulhu stuff and the Conan, is that I use some of Gene M. I don't even know how to say it. Ariel, like the Clan of the Cave Bear.
Yeah,
the braver parts of Clan of the Cave Bear are the parts that I tried to instill, and part of that is because my aunt, who when I was but a young squire, I would sit at their big wooden table. My uncle was a carpenter, and he had this big like finished wood table at the lake that he had, and I would sit there and I would scrawl out these stories. And she was a big fan of elements of Clan of the Cave Bear, but she felt that they missed the same criticism that most modern people would have of those books. There was no real research. There was more fantasy building, right? And she loved the research of it. So she was always researching ancient seeds and writing stories about ancient cultures and doing all this research and trying to make up stuff. The only parts she was trying to make up were the parts that no one could ever know. And anything that we did know, she tried to keep, right? Now, she never did get those stories published, and she never did expand that. And so one of the things that I've always sort of carried along into this set of stories, my nostalgic piece, is like some of the characters that I heard her describe in her stories. Those descriptions are sort of present in some of the characters that are in my stories, because she won't get a chance to publish those stories. Unfortunately, she's in some ill health, and so it's sort of my way of sort of carrying that DNA. And in our Shared World stories, there's the mentor that's telling the tale to the younger person as a framing device for the story. Really that comes from that relationship of like younger me wanting to be a storyteller and this older matron figure telling me tales of the ancient world, and just all of that baked in together to set that frame. So I lost the thread there. Oh yeah, the different ingredient was Clan of the Cave Bear for me.
Sure, yeah, and to me, like, I got really interested in the idea of, I've been really obsessing about horror fiction and horror film, and I got really interested in stories that try to move you close to the monster's point of view, but not really take the monster's point of view, in the sense that it's not a sympathetic creature necessarily, and you don't really understand it, but it's kind of coming close to it in certain moments. And I got really interested in the idea that women don't get to be monsters in a pure sense in the horror story, They have to.
Yeah, traditionally it's the final girl,
traumatized.
the trauma, the victim.
They're the victim, or they're the final girl, or they're. If they are a monster, there's an explanation as to why they became a monster. And I got really interested in, like, can you have a female protagonist who has this monstrosity to her and is a powerful figure that doesn't need to apologize for her power or have some deep.
Is this all because you have a teenage
history.
daughter?
Well, I'm
Who
sure
they
that
will
was in
never
the mix.
apologize for their
I'm
power.
sure that was in the mix, but so I came up with a she-wolf comic idea out of this, kind of interest, and I also was just kind of in my back of my head when I came up with this Draxus character for the shared world. Like I was like, can I write a character who's really interesting and we really want to follow her, but we don't want to see her succeed because it's horrible. It's horrible what she's trying to do. And so from page 1, she's eating, like my shared world stories, I was like, page 1, when I intro the character, she's just slaughtered a family and has eaten the child and has thrown like the bones of the child over. She's cooked the child's and the mother's bones over the corpse. Like she set the father's corpse on fire and cooked the women and the child and then eaten them. And like that's your introduction to the character. So of course, like you can see why that story gets rejected. But that's the character we're with, and we're like trying to, like, on a certain level, like we're like, okay, well, what's she doing? She's got a goal. We're pursuing. See her. She's doggedly pursuing this goal, and you always wanted to, by default, see a main character succeed at their goal. But then as you start to realize what her goal is, it gets like more and more like, oh no. I just like, can I work with it and make it work?
In modern day, where people are often trying to create some kind of sympathetic backstory, I have to admit there is a place in my heart for an unapologetic villain, and even if they are the protagonist of the story, right? You want to follow them.
Lecter, right? He's interesting, and you don't necessarily want him to win, but you really want to see what he does next.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting. So your Draxus story, which is has this nice warm fuzzy family oriented opening, right? It figures a family prominently, it's real heartwarming.
That sounds like a very manufactured pull quote. ... family oriented ...
Family that stays together gets flayed together.
Right? Oh my goodness.
But also I just want to do serial fiction. Like mine's the short stories. I want them real self-contained, and I want one to build on the other. So you're kind of doing that. You and James with your.
See, but we intentionally have.
Kyber's, the Kyber stories aren't doing that, but in a sense they're kind of telling the story of this city over time.
So I took some unintentional errors in our first 2 drafts and made them intentional now, leaned into them, so that the narrator is unreliable. So that if the constant reader compares both stories, which sort of refer to the same inciting incident, same event, you can realize that the narration that is telling the story is the tool. I'm going to tell you what you need to hear to go and do the thing you have to do. And if you have read both stories and you compare carefully those 2 versions of events, they're different each time. And we're working on a third in that which sort of exposes the truth of why that is true and why that is happening and how that is. But you don't need to know. The same way if I were to tell you the history of Canada from my perspective, it would be vastly different from the history of Canada from another person's perspective, right? And so we're just trying to play around with those ideas. So whereas yours are supposed to build directly on each other, ours build together a larger mythology. But then Kyber is about a location. So how does the location Kyber figure in? Because ours are more like roving tales.
Yeah. At least our original culture, where the story starts out, is people who inhabit the wilderness.
Yeah.
But yours is more of the deep, dark heart of the cities and the underbelly.
Yeah, and I think I just got excited by that idea of, like, Rome burning and being rebuilt, and like all of these iterations of the same city in the same place, and why is it important to keep building there, and so that was some of it. I have the Undercity in Kyber, which is really just an uncovered part of an older version of the same city, that is used by thieves and rakes to get around, and monsters live down there. And it's sort of, it's Dungeons and Dragons bones, I suppose. There had to be a place for the monsters to live, so they live under the city.
Right.
And again, some of it was just the laziness of having already come up with a location that I liked for one story, and having a deadline for another story I wanted to submit. So I just used that same location and then introduced new characters. So Red was the first story I wrote set in Khyber. I brought the character of Needle back from that story, even though he wasn't the point of view character in First They Came for the Pigs, which is about evil mushroom men. But I brought him back because I liked his voice. He was barely in it. Like, he was only referred to until the very end of the story in Red. But I loved the voice that came out of that. And so I wanted to get a little bit more of him. And I was struck with the idea that he knows too much about the city to be the narrator.
Yeah.
Because then the reader will know too much about the city. And I don't know enough about the city yet. and so that was why I didn't want him. I wanted him to show up and be kind of an unreliable narrator, even when he wasn't the narrator.
Right.
Like, you're like, does this guy actually know what he's talking about? Like, what is going on with this guy? And so I wanted a world beyond Khyber, and so I just started pulling names kind of out of my hat, as it were, and some of them came from like an old high school story. Like I did a
That's
epic
funny.
fantasy high school project where I drew a map and I wrote 4 short stories in it, and I submitted them to my teacher in like a little, almost like a little steamer trunk full of artifacts. And so there was goblets in there and like chocolate coins and but the centerpiece of it was supposed to be the short story collection, which I had handwritten in calligraphy and dyed with tea to look old and all, it was all.
That's great. Wow.
I still have that. But that's where Valkyra came from. The name Valkyra. So I'm like, I want a kind of place that's Viking-ish. And so I grabbed that name. And I think Sestel came out of there. And some of those names, those names have been kicking around.
We have such similar pedigrees. Like my grade 7 experience was, we were part of a pilot program where basically the teacher told us, you're going to write every day whatever you want, and you're going to submit it to me, and I'm going to see if your mark is worse in English at the end or better. Like, that's literally how we did our grade 7 English class. And he would do lectures and do stuff about like how to make a story good, or if you're writing a cover letter, or if you're, he would do all these different forms, but he sort of did not care what we did. He was 100%, and I won't name him because this may be a mischaracterization, but the vibe I get now as an adult, he took the easiest class he could take as a teacher. Do whatever you want, just be quiet. I'll be sitting over here, and you submit your stuff to me. Right? This was the pilot program they did. But during that time, I drew some maps of a fantasy story, and I was convinced I was going to write the next greatest, probably Forgotten Realms novel at that time. But I had just read, I can picture the cover now. It was a Steve Jackson novel, Trolltooth Wars, right? Grade 7, Trolltooth Wars, I'm pretty sure, as I had just read. And so that's what I was setting out to do. And I was making up a whole bunch of place names and a bunch of stuff. And some of that ended up, the reason I go on this long journey with you is because a bunch of those place names ended up in this story also, just because they've been living in my imagination rent-free for so long as complete places all the way since then.
I had never really developed them, and yet there was still a shorthand in my head that when I said the name Valkyra, when I said the name Sestel,
It felt real to you.
It felt real to me,
Yeah.
and I feel like I could get enough reality into a sentence or two description without having to fully flesh them out.
And to be fair, as an outsider, I probably know as much about Valkyra and can speak about its culture about as much as I can about Istanbul as an outsider, right? Like, they are just ideas that I visited briefly.
Absolutely.
I wonder if I have, because I also remember in high school, me and my brother came up with like a fantasy world after reading something or other. and we had like drew a map and had all the gods and the whatever.
We gotta give
was.
Tolkien the shout out for those maps,
Yeah.
right? Christopher Tolkien writing, doing his dad's maps, because I think that's the first one, right? He did that.
But there's something about when Valkura became real by just being mentioned in a story that got published and wasn't just living in my head anymore.
Yeah.
It became real, and then it was like, well, I want to write a story there now.
Yeah.
And so then, for people who read All and Nothing when it was published by Abyss and Apex, like they know way more about Valkura than they do about Khyber.
Right.
All they know about Khyber is that silver comes from there. Like that,
Right.
that was where the Valkurans got their silver, was from Khyber, right? And so it just Khyber became the one or two, sentence mention in this other story, and I liked that aspect of it. It's because I named you, you became real, and now because you're real, I need to know more about you, and I need to learn more about you. So that's how I learn about
Has
things.
Valkura sat in stasis since the high school experience? You've not used it until this point again, and
No,
just
it was in that high school map. I hadn't used it until I plucked the name because I wanted a Viking sounding name for where my Northmen came from.
so this world and this geography, these shared environments and stories, all stemmed out of some past creative experiences, but also rejection of the stories that we submitted.
That's right. All through our lives
Yeah.
to teachers and friends. Yeah.
But in a timeline, so we submitted our story,
Yeah.
you submitted your story. As a result of not getting into this anthology, we've committed our stories together. Jonathan, you then actually brought the worlds together in the most shared sense in the second volume.
And to balance things out, has been summarily rejected by sharing those stories in other places.
Yeah, and those two, just to be clear for people who maybe don't realize, what they're talking about is there's two smaller kind of volumes of shared world.
Convention exclusive editions.
Convention exclusive editions. And so they've been collected together to become this more official, non-exclusive, more wide.
With a proper map,
edition.
a bunch of illustrations.
Like one new story.
Yeah, new story.
Yeah, actually, that's right. What my one Drax's story to balance hasn't been published anywhere else before.
Yeah.
Because everyone keeps rejecting. Because in that story is the story of how Draxus came to go on her quest. She's like has this sort of flashback backstory is the main focal point, and without I don't want to spoil it for
Yeah,
people.
no
Let's just say that.
Also, James was going to finish his point.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I just want to say, but it's interesting how the unreliability theme comes out, because my explicit sort of thing in the Draxus stories is like, okay, here's this woman who has heard all these stories about what is the truth of this world, and she's realized that they don't line up. Mm-hmm. And so her impetus is she needs to know the truth. She needs to drive at it. Of course, that's the classic Lovecraftian stumble.
Right.
You never should pursue knowing.
You can't handle the truth.
You can't handle
Are you going to end the Draxus, collection with "the truth is at the door"? I can hear it growing.
But yeah, so then I kind of come into the rejection pile by writing stories. Shared world is my path to rejection.
Yeah. The question I was going to lead to is the idea that we all seem to be having way more fun with these stories than if we had offloaded them to an anthology and they'd been shared amongst other pieces. And so the question is what for you gentlemen, because you do a fair amount more of this than I do, is what's the impetus to even submit to these anthology series in the first place? For me, when Gregory, you invited me to collaborate on this story, and it was just so much fun. Like the idea of just getting to create and collaborate with you was so much fun. It didn't matter to me whether this was accepted or not. But is it the draw? Is it just the publisher? Is it the renown? Is it just trying to get some impetus to
Chadwick
start
has
creating?
the most short story credits published by other people, reputable places, than any of us here. So I think he should answer this question first so that I can learn something.
Well, for me, I mean, we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording. The first impetus is a deadline. to make me
necessary.
like. I mean, I can write to a personal deadline of, I want to have, X done before, and I set goals all the time. I publish my goals on my website at the start of the year of like, this is what I want to get done this year. And it's like, it makes it real. And
Hold yourself accountable.
Yeah, hold myself accountable.
Yeah.
But a really great way of holding myself accountable is actually sending it in to a market and knowing, in the best case scenario, I will know about it ahead of time and sort of plan that in my year, but that doesn't always work out. Sometimes it's just like, I want to be in that because a friend is editing it, or I look at it as an opportunity of this anthology is paying a pro sales rate, or I've always wanted to work with that editor, and so it's an excuse to finish something to get in front of a specific set of eyes, but because I don't feel I'm a natural short story writer because I came up mostly reading novels and started reading more short stories once I started writing more short stories. I have all of these snippets and bits and bobs of things that might be something someday. Like I have a novel's worth of text in a document that is just called snippets and blurbs and things that might be something someday. Yeah. And if I get an anthology, especially a themed anthology, I'll look at that and be like, okay, I will almost always have 1,000 words of a thing that I started that will almost suit that theme.
Yeah, because genre is kind of insular like that, right? There'll be certain themes that recur and come up, and they're somewhere in there that you can.
And it doesn't. It never seemed to matter how esoteric. Somebody's like, I'm doing a Green Man themed anthology. I'm like, I've got something for that.
Yeah,
well, it's only 1,000 words.
You just brought up an anthology, the Carpe Nocturna,
Yes.
and I was like, I have a story all about the night that I'm working on.
I look at that 1,000 words that almost always came to me on the bus or sitting somewhere, and it's handwritten in my notebook and then gets transcribed. It's a moment of inspiration that comes out of nowhere, and then I'm like, I don't know what to do with this, and I don't know what comes next, so I stop writing. The anthology shows up, and I troll through that snippets document, and I pull anything and everything that might work. Yeah. And usually then I end up with roughly 2,000 or 3,000 extra words.
Polished.
They're not polished. 2 or 3 extra thousand, so I'll usually have 2,000 to 3,000 words to work with. And I start assembling that and moving those bits and bobs around, trying to find a story. And then I hone that down until I know what I'm keeping. And then I write the rest of it.
So my short story...
It's not efficient. Yeah. I don't recommend doing it this way.
Well, speaking of efficiency...
that is what has worked for me.
And speaking of the impetus to write short stories, I love writing. I write all the time, and I have this habit where I do most of the grocery shopping in our family's life. And I tend to look for the longest line at the grocery store. And I open a document in my phone, which is a short story or novel that I'm working on that is just for writing in line, stealing back time, right? So if I have to do a task I don't want to do and I'm waiting in line somewhere, I have a number of I'm waiting in line somewhere stories that are on my phone that I just throw stuff into and whatever. And so what ends up happening is certain tasks that I have to do more often, I'll have a story further along. So when you brought up this anthology that's coming up, it just reminded me that I have this story that I've been writing in line at the grocery store that all takes place at night, and it's all like it fits that theme perfectly. So how I find those things is just following my interest, and someone suggests it, and if it works, now I have a deadline. Mm-hmm. That deadline that you told me means it goes from time that I'm stealing from somewhere else, and now time that I'm choosing to assign to it. And that's a big change for me, is that once I've accepted a deadline, then my writing practice and my writing schedule, then it gets fit into there.
So that exercise in and of itself has led through to all of us creating short stories that we've amalgamated together. And even through the deadlines, the fact that we've all sat down, we've worked on the geography of the world, developed the maps, and now we're heading towards an October Comic-Con event, and it will all culminate with November 29th and the release of the Kyber book. So it's a weird circle how this all happens and develops, and sort of perseverance over top of...
Yes, don't give up and don't die.
Yeah, well,
kind of
we
it.
wouldn't have any of this if we hadn't submitted to that first anthology
Yeah.
to begin with. And like you never know what's going to come out of those, right? Whether it's a bit of IP that, maybe LeVar Burton wants to read on his podcast, right? Like that's a thing that happens.
Yeah.
I just was, again, for a lot of these anthologies I wanted to be in, I was lazy, and I'm like, I've got a Thunder Road idea that I also write, Norse mythology inspired urban fantasy, and I've got a story set in my Thunder Road world that might work for this anthology, and I get it out there, and like over time I published enough of those that I was able to collect them, and it was its own book in time for the 10th anniversary of my first novel's publication. So like there's also that other sort of the back end of you're creating this IP. I think unless you're really lucky, you can't be guaranteed a novel every year. But if I work at it, like I have had at least one short story published every year since I've started publishing.
I think a lot to be said too for just the inspiration of those pulp writers. Like where I kind of got into the short story writing is I had read an interview with Ray Bradbury at some point when I was young, and in the interview they were asking him about kind of how he got started, and he said he just started writing a short story every week. Every week he would write one short story and send it out, and then the next week he read another short story and sent it out, and he kept getting rejection after rejection after rejection until suddenly he wrote one particular story, and then it gets published, and he said like it was like a floodgates had opened, and all of a sudden like he started just publishing everything. But I remember like just thinking in my youth, I was like, I guess that's how you become a writer. You write a short story every week and send it out. And I also had read Stephen King. He used to have those great short story collections, and in the back he would have a little tiny snippet about each story. Like it'd say kind of a paragraph as to where he got the idea or where it was published or whatever. And I remember once reading one of his little descriptions at the back of the book. It was probably around the same time. And he had said like, blah, 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 I wrote this story for whatever, but then he rejected it, and then, I sent it to this other place. And I remember reading that and thinking, Stephen King gets rejections still.
Yeah.
And I was like, I guess, Bradbury and Stephen King, all they would do is just write a story every week or every, King also kind of talks about having that kind of workhorse schedule at one point. And I just remember thinking like, that's what you do. And so to me, it was just like a weird natural thing, but I think there's something to be said for that kind of, the pulp writers really had that workman-like approach, which I think is one reason they were denigrated historically, because they weren't pretending that they had inspiration, that the gods came down and gave them this great idea. They were just like, then I did this, then I did this, then I did this. Like I liked that.
And they were living or dying.
Writing it's a craft, right?
It's a
you
craft.
can only get better at it by doing it. So if you're doing it all the time.
And I loved that idea because I recognized it as the same sort of approach that my grandfather, who was a carpenter, took. It's like, you do this, then you do that, then you do that, and then now you got this chair. And I remember just thinking like, this is the way that it feels real to me now. If I just take this, approach, I could be as esoteric and strange and experimental and artsy as I want, but I have like a handle on it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so what I like about the Shared World project is that way in which it kind of pays a bit of that homage to like the pulp ethos, but it kind of updates it, for kind of like we all have pretty wide ranging sensibilities, and are drawing, not just from sword and sorcery, but also from these more these other kind of areas. So I think James has a great kind of point to tie it all in there, I think, to the fact that, we've got this Shared World book out. We've got Kyber, the first, complete, standalone Shared World book. All this is available and coming out. It'll be out. It's out to order now, really, from McNally Robinson, if not other places by the time you hear this. And then we've got, again, if you're at the Winnipeg Comic Con, October 27 to 29, or November 29 at McNally Robinson or online. It's where people can check it out, check out the Shared World, and join in the fun of the Shared World. Any last thoughts about the whole Shared World, anyone?
Well, while you were talking about your grandfather, I have to digress here. My grandfather, who served in the RAF as a tail gunner during World War II, he came home and rarely talked about that stuff. But what he did do to process it was in a little room in the basement. Probably should have been much better ventilated than it was. He would do oil paintings of Lake Winnipeg, the rolling waves of Lake Winnipeg, and each of those little brush strokes, he told me later, the reason he always he never painted the calm lake was because he would use it as a way of processing those emotions and those feelings and those ideas, and they would just go into the painting. And the idea that whatever's happening in the world that you didn't like, you could turn into something interesting, and other people didn't have to know what it was about. People would look at it and go like, "Oh, what a beautiful painting of the beach and the waves crashing on the beach," and he would just say, "Thank you." He wouldn't say like, "Those waves contain nightmares," right? And I think that that's kind of a fun thing about art, and I think that that's sort of what's cool about horror is that it's the reverse of those things. We're making the scary on top of all this fun we had, right, as kids. Like what is in common here is this like sort of fun moments of our childhood or our adolescence or our publishing career, being able to transmute some failure into some successes. But these are not like big moments of suffering. And so as a result, our characters are freer to suffer because we didn't have to. And I think there's a weird subversion in all of that, what lies beneath. That's my last thought. You can edit it out as necessary.
My last thought is that getting to interact with all of you just in the last number of years, I've had so much fun doing this, but I love the idea now that in other people reading and viewing this, that there are other creators who are coming up and wanting to share in the shared world now, and that there's potential for other voices to occupy the geography, the lands, and the names that we've started, and to see where that ends up expanding off to.
Yeah, tell us new truths about things we made up.
Absolutely. Yeah. What didn't we say?
And explicitly and literally, if you go to sharedworld.ca, you can get more information about the whole project and find a way to get a hold of us and ask us more about the Shared World, or send us some stories set in the Shared World, or come talk to us at these events that we're discussing as well. Chadwick, any last words for
not because you'll be killed next
you're executed
and served to Draxus, but
Draxus doesn't eat men because men are worthless.
I suppose it would be fitting treading on Jonathan's cannibal toes, right, with a cannibal story of my own in Kyber, but no,
you have a good one though.
This has just been so much fun. Every time we get together to talk, whether it's Shared World or not, it's been a blast getting to know you guys over the years, and I'm really excited for how we build on this world and keep it new, keep it fresh, and keep it growing.
Sinister.
Keep it shared. So thanks to all of you for talking, and to you listening. Keep writing the wrong way about and set in the Shared World.